a clear framework so that we can work with the Uganda Ministry of Water and Environment to come up with what is the way ahead and what can be done better in Uganda and learning from Uganda in all our countries. Because it is very clear we share a common present and a common future. It is clear today that we have, as I said, growing demands of water. We've also understood that when it comes to COVID and it comes to such a huge health pandemic, water is the biggest preventive agent that we have. Without the access to clean water across the country, which means to the rich and the poor in our country, to the developed parts of our cities and the undeveloped parts of our cities, to the people who live in colonies, to the people who live in slums, if we do not have the availability of clean water, we will not also be able to deal with COVID or any other disease that hits our people. Water is also a massive enabler when it comes to health, when it comes to employment, when it comes to well-being. We know that. And yet we also know that today with climate change, we are standing at a time when water scarcity will only grow if we don't manage it well. Because climate change is going to bring in more variable weather events. It is going to add to more rain and less rain, which means that our ability to hold the water becomes absolutely crucial. And of course, after we have increased the augmentation of our water resources, we also have to do everything to minimize demand, to make sure that the demand is done in a way that everybody has access to that water. But today's seminar is really first and foremost to say, what can we do to augment the water resources of our countries to start with? And that's where the role of rainwater and the role of groundwater comes in. You will be amazed to know, Chris, that in India, groundwater is still invariably called a minor water resource. And yet today, in a country like India, groundwater actually serves the needs of drinking water and irrigation more than even surface water. So we have to understand the role of groundwater. Now, the problem with groundwater has been that we are using it unsustainably, that we abstract the water more than we actually put back into the wells. So we need to come up with a groundwater management strategy in which we both use groundwater, but we use it sustainably because we are also recharging the groundwater. And the question then becomes, how can this be done? Because groundwater recharge is really about decentralized systems. You can't recharge groundwater through centralized systems because groundwater is decentralized. So the role and the involvement of communities becomes critical. The role and the involvement of making sure that the catchment where the water will be recharged is free of pollution becomes critical. So those are really the issues that come up as you start using groundwater more. But it's critical in our countries that we think about it, that we actually put these plans in force. Because today we are on the path where, whether we like it or not, we are using more and more groundwater, and it is becoming unsustainable because the groundwater tables are declining, and because we don't care about the quality of the management of our water, that pollutes the aquifers, and that then leads to groundwater contamination and makes the water not potable. So those are really where we need to understand what countries need to do. And our effort today is to do a deep dive into what we have found in Uganda. And we are privileged to have with us my colleague Shushmita, who will make the overview presentation. I will then ask the co-author of the report, Keyune, to also speak and to add to the report and what he believes are some of the key findings of the report. And then I will turn to Chris Tumusimle to speak as the key person in charge in Uganda in terms of how he sees this report and how he sees the findings of this report and what he feels we could work together in the future. I will then turn to Tanzania and then Kenya. And I hope to do this all in an hour's time so that we can keep the discussion tight, crisp, and impactful. So again, welcome everybody. And I'm going to request Shushmita to make her presentation. Shushmita?
Thank you, ma'am. So we have good afternoon, everybody. So as you know, we are working very closely with Ministry of Water and Environment, Uganda, to actually chalk out the different strategies to augment the groundwater. Now, in this process, we have actually found out a report which we have published and which says about the strategies in which we can augment the groundwater resources. The main aim of the report is to boost the groundwater reserve in the country, especially the rural areas which depend heavily on groundwater. So the groundwater scenario, if you see, just like any other rural areas of global south, it's 75% of the domestic areas are in the rural and they depend heavily on the groundwater, which is actually coming from different bore wells, shallow wells, and spring water. Uganda currently has enough groundwater reserves, but there are some patches in the northeast and the southwest which we have seen, which is actually facing a problem of high rate of urbanization, loss of water bodies, and also over and above this, there is a variability in the spatial and the temporal variation of the rainfall, which is ultimately affecting the natural recharge of the groundwater. So the water bodies, which are the key recharge zones of any area, is also facing a decline. And the most decline is observed in areas around Lake Victoria and Kyoga drainage basins, which have the most reserve of groundwater in the country. Now, just to give you an overview that we have found that the Victoria Nile and Kyoga, as I was telling you, has a maximum reserve of groundwater, and Kitega has the minimum amount of reserve. But unfortunately, we have seen that the water body decline is happening in around Victoria Nile and Kyoga, which means that the groundwater recharge is also reduced in these areas. Now, just to give you an idea how the rainfall is varying and how the recharge is also varying, you will see on the left-hand side the map, which shows the minimum rainfall, which is shown in red, is from the northeast and the southwest part, as I was telling you, facing the decline of groundwater. And these are the areas where also the recharge potential is very low. So although the groundwater reserve is right now enough in the country, but there are patches which are facing the scarcity. Now, apart from quantity, we have in the research findings, we have found that there is a quality concern, which is mainly attributed to the natural and also human made, and which leads to different health hazards like diarrhea, which is actually showing an increase across years. There are enough policies, acts, and strategies in the country. The Water Act, the Impact and Assessment Act, which actually talks about the protection of the groundwater. There are policies to protect the groundwater sources, protect the catchments. But right now, the need of the hour is to implement these policies, implement the strategies, and develop a well-developed communication strategies so that there is a huge boost in the groundwater, both quantity wise as well as quality wise. Now, just to give you an idea that there is a huge problem with the human made disaster to this groundwater, which is shown by total coliform, which is seen in bore wells and wells. The water coming out from the bore wells and wells are actually affected with the coliform because of poor sanitation. So the quality is affected. So we need to actually think very seriously on the toilet technologies, the ways to control manage the black water and grey water in the rural areas. Now we have actually, as we were telling, that the main aim of the paper was actually to give a boost to the groundwater reserve, and we have come up with series of recommendations. First of all, as I was telling, there are enough policies and strategies. We need to strengthen it. Instead of talking about supply side management, we have focused on the demand side management. The protection of water bodies and wetlands is very important so that there are enough recharge of the groundwater. And as we have seen that the groundwater is contaminated with the coliform, then policies on reuse of wastewater should be there so that we do not have the black water coming out and contaminating the groundwater. And the fecal sludge management is also very important so that the soil and groundwater is not contaminated. The council, the village council, which is there, should be actually incentivized for the water conservation measures they take up. Now, the next set of recommendations is about creating a database, creating a series for the engineers to implement the technological interventions so that they can actually pick up the type of technology they need to recharge the groundwater. And there should be a database of such technologies available to them, and small water harvesting structures and traditional structures should be revived and promoted. Uganda always had very beautiful traditional water harvesting structures, so there should be ways to revive and renovate them. And throughout the process, there should be a continuous monitoring of the whole project there so that the groundwater is actually preserved, and also the catchment around it should be also protected so that we have clean groundwater, which is the main drinking water source for the rural areas. And the third set of recommendations talks about the institutional mechanism, which says that the women should be the key decision makers. So whether if we are talking about any country, any rural area of the global south, it's a woman who is bearing the load of actually arranging the water. So they should be given the priority in making the decision of what sort of project should be implemented. They should be involved from the planning stage to the implementation stage. And there should be enough capacity building and awareness programs for all the stakeholders, or whoever is involved in such water supply projects, whether it's an NGO, whether it's a CSO, whether it's a government authority, even the corporates who are actually playing a key role in these projects should be actually given proper training, and they should be given proper, they should be actually exposed to different awareness programs so that they know about the technologies, they know how to plan a structure and what should be the best project for a particular area. And as I was telling that traditional water harvesting structures are very beautiful in Uganda, and so they should be revived and promoted. So a national body should be there to support and coordinate the communities, because communities should be given the key role in the whole process of planning and implementation of the projects. So coordinating with the local communities, a national body should be there who can support and coordinate this. So these are the recommendations which we have for Uganda after looking at the data. And thank you.
Sorry, I didn't know how to, I couldn't unmute very quickly. So just forgive me for that. I would now like to request Erisa. Erisa Kiyune is the senior officer at the Ministry of Water and Environment, and he is the co-author of this report. This report, as we are saying, has been done in collaboration with the Ministry of Water and Environment. And the aim of this report is, as I said right at the beginning, to work to come up with the agenda for the future. So, Erisa, could I now request you to add on to anything that Shushmita has said, or any highlights that you want to give? Erisa, you're on mute.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sonita, and good afternoon, everyone. Like I've been introduced, my name is Erisa Cheyune, and by training, I'm a hydrogeologist. I'm a groundwater person. I have been involved with Susimita in coming up with this write-up. And just to add a few things which I think need to be highlighted as part of the report. Just in terms of statistics, Uganda, I can say that we haven't quantified our groundwater resources. Like any other, most of the countries, groundwater is not yet studied that fully. So we believe the collaboration with CSE is also going to help us come up with some of the issues as far as the quantity of groundwater in Uganda is concerned. In Uganda, like Susimita pointed out, we largely depend on groundwater for home use and for agriculture. It's one of our vital resources. On average, we drill about 2,000 wells a year. And currently, the current stock of wells where we extract groundwater is about 62,000. But the trend is increasing because of population, because of demand from agriculture. So there is need to study the resource. The other thing I also wanted to point out is that when you analyze our water resources, our water resource is transboundary. Actually, about 69% of our water comes from Congo. So there are also issues of, there are those transboundary issues of managing water both upstream and also downstream. So there are issues of quality we need to manage with our neighbors.
Can you just step back a little bit? Your head is getting cut off.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Much better. Thank you.
Okay, all right. In Uganda, like Susimita pointed out, we receive quite some substantial amount of rainwater. We have 4 seasons, and we receive on average about 1,200 millimeters of rain. That is per year. But on a sad note, 80% of it goes back, it evaporates. Okay. And also we, one of the constraints we have that is related to the groundwater recharge is the geology. Our country is basement complex. It's the hard rock, okay, like the rest of Africa. So that's where we experience issues of scarcity and drying up of water sources in some of the areas, like Susimita pointed out.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to keep it short because I want the others to come in. So if you could just keep it short and just, any highlight that you want to give. Sorry, but
right.
Thank you.
Okay. Then maybe I can just note down something which is important in the report, which I want to come out, is the issue of sustainability, financial sustainability. When we talk about the recharge, because the recommendations are that we do the groundwater recharge and management at the local level, the lowest level. There are issues of also financial sustainability. Who actually pays for the structures that are going to do the recharge, and how do we do the O&M of those structures? For now, I can leave it at that. Maybe I can come up later to clarify on a few things. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, Chris, can I now bring you in? Mr. Christopher Tumaseme is the Commissioner of Water Utility Regulation Department of the Ministry of Water and Environment. This is our partner. We are working with the ministry, so we are really privileged to have Chris join us today and to talk about the agenda and how to take it forward. Please, Chris.
Oh, right, Sunita. Good afternoon, good evening in India time. Chris Tumaseme, Uganda, and thanks for that introduction. Thank you, CSE, for the research, and especially when we approached you and this issue of how can we take on groundwater recharge. And especially knowing that from the statistics Mr. Cheyune had given my colleague in Uganda, we are utilizing quite a lot of groundwater. We have a challenge of geology, and this geology almost is the same as India. And the geology mainly here, we have granite. And most of the areas we drill in, we find it is almost like that. Then we have approached CSE because we know that you have done something towards this. In India, where you are using quite a lot of groundwater for irrigation, for water, for different activities, up to about 25%, I'm told.
Yes.
And we wanted to see how best can we get support from the CSE, and we look at how we can go about the geology, how we can go about the tapping. It's good, and thanks a lot for the paper that Susimita and Erisa have brought up. We have got these issues of policy, they are not a problem. The legal framework is not a problem, but the problem is actually practicing it.
Yes.
And this is where we want to see how we can work with CSE and do that research. How do we get this water into the ground? How do we tap rainwater? We have quite a lot of rainwater. As I speak now, we are having a lot of floods in the country. But much as these floods are there, the groundwater recharge is really bad. The utilization of groundwater is not that to the expectation. And as the paper they indicated, we have got areas which are really still having challenges.
Yes.
So what we are going to take forward, want to see how we can work with you as CSE and also the partners that are on this webinar, so that we can learn from you and we see how we can link up and learn from Uganda, learn from India, learn from also the colleagues that are on the chat, that we see how we can do groundwater recharge using rainwater. And this is what we are going to move on. We are highly expectant. We have done an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the CSE.
Yes.
We want to see how we can try out in some of these areas. We thank CSE for the recommendations, some of these recommendations on how we can do the community wells, how we can do groundwater recharge with the communities. And some of those recommendations are eye-opening, because I was thinking that we can do this for public, the big water supply systems, but there is a recommendation that we can also do it at the local level.
Yes.
Looking at the small communities and how we can use those small communities. They recharge, the rainwater is there, we recharge and use it for the betterment of the people who are using groundwater. Thank you very much. For the meantime, we can discuss at a later time as well. Yes. Sunita, please.
Thank you, Chris. And I will first get all the speakers in, and then we will get the agenda together. Mr. Khalid Massa. Khalid is the Assistant Director at the Environmental Health, Sanitation and Hygiene section in the Ministry of Health, Community Development, Gender, Elderly and Children in Tanzania. So Tanzania is a very interesting country which has actually brought sanitation under the Ministry of Health. And it's a fascinating it's actually a big learning, Khalid, for all of us in the region, because bringing the health issue with the water issue and the sanitation issue is a starting point for change as well. So Khalid, let me invite you, and you have a presentation to show us as well.
Thank you, Sunita, for the introduction. I'm not sure if you are seeing my...
Yes, we are. We are.
All right. I'll put them in the slideshow. Okay. As I've been introduced, my name is Khalid Massa, working with the Ministry of Health as an Assistant Director, Environmental Health and Sanitation. I'm coordinating wash issues in Tanzania. The layout of my presentation, I will give you the introduction about the location and profile of the country. And then I'll share with you a brief background. Then I'll talk about the factors affecting groundwater quality. I'll show you the proportion of population accessing basic water sources. Then I'll display the proportion of population that are using groundwater sources in Tanzania. And I'll share with you some of the initiatives that are helping to address inadequate supply of water. Then I'll conclude the location and profile of Tanzania. That's where it is located in Africa. just to share with you that Tanzania is the land of Kilimanjaro, Serengeti and Zanzibar, bordering 8 countries, including Uganda and Kenya. The Tanzania has abundant surface and groundwater sources, including wetland, natural rivers, lake, and is also receiving a substantial good amount of rainfall as well, like neighboring countries. Groundwater is an important source of water supply. Actually, more than 25% of the domestic water in Tanzania is supplied by groundwater. And as it has been documented by various researchers, there is a positive trend towards utilization of groundwater as the main water sources particularly for domestic purposes. And in rural areas, they are mainly using shallow wells for domestic purpose. But in the peri-urban suburb, where there is no distribution network, and also in places where there is an unreliable supply of water, they are also using groundwater. If I can give you an example of Dar es Salaam alone, Mjema and Mtoni documented that there are more than 10,000 groundwater supply of water sources. But there are factors that are affecting the quality of groundwater. And the groundwater is affected by both natural and human-made .
Okay, Khaled, go ahead.
I think my presentation is stuck.
Hanging? Yeah, these things happen. Do you want to reboot it? Your own factors affecting groundwater quality.
Okay, let me move where I was. I think I was here.
Yes.
I was trying to share with you some of the factors that are affecting the quality of water. And as I said, both natural and human factors are affecting the groundwater quality. But pollution has been identified by several researchers like Mato, Sadiq, and Kongola as one of the major problems facing groundwater resources in the country. And some of the man-made activities that are affecting the quality of water are mining, on-site sanitation, agriculture, industrial, to mention a few. Now let me share with you the proportion of population that are accessing water sources in the target. And this was recorded in 2017. The average is 57, but we'll find in the rural areas, we're talking about 43%, while in urban areas, we're talking about 86% population that is accessing basic water sources. In urban, we are targeting 100% by 2025. And in rural areas, we are targeting 90% by 2025. There is also a demand for water supply, which is equally high in healthcare facilities and also in schools. In healthcare facilities, we're talking about 68%, that are at least using basic source of drinking water supply. While in primary schools, we are talking about 68.2 of population that are accessing basic water sources. And here I wanted to share with you the proportion of population that depend on groundwater as an alternative sources. You'll find, if I can pick some of the sources, you'll find the rainwater collection, we're talking about 1%. Borehole, we're talking about 8%. Piped water, we're talking about 8%. Piped water in dwelling houses, we're talking about 12%. These are some of the portion of population that depend on groundwater as an alternative sources of water in Tanzania. There are also some initiatives that are trying to address the issue of inadequacy of water supply at household level, schools, and healthcare facilities. We are trying to construct boreholes, and we've also started to do rainwater harvesting system. Actually, we're planning this year through the National Sanitation Campaign that we will install over 1,500 rainwater harvesting system in healthcare facilities. We've also have got other policies, action that are helping to promote wash and groundwater recharge potential, like beautification, dust control, and groundwater recharges, as you can see in those pictures. Now let me conclude my presentation that in Tanzania, groundwater is also among the main sources of water supply in many parts. But man-made human activities are the main cause of the pollution of groundwater resources. But lucky enough, there are initiatives that we are trying to address the inadequacy of water supply at household level, schools, and healthcare facilities through rainwater harvesting system that actually offers an additional solution. I want to end my presentation by acknowledging Center for Science and Environment for inviting me to present in this very important webinar. I want to acknowledge my Department of Preventive Services, the Director of Preventive Services, Dr. Amour and Mariam Mahmoudou, who played a major role in preparing this presentation. I also want to thank Dr. Hussein Mohammedi from Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences, who also played a major role in preparing this presentation. And the last but not least, I want to acknowledge the way that is being done by all environmental health officers and the WASH stakeholders in Tanzania. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Khaled. Very comprehensive, very clear. Thank you so much for this. Vincent, if I could now bring you in. Vincent is the head of programs, the Kenya Water and Sanitation Civil Society Network in Kenya. And he will also be presenting through a PowerPoint. So Vincent, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sunita. I hope I can be heard clearly.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I would just like to share some experiences from Kenya as far as groundwater is concerned. And for a start, is just to say that Kenya has a very good potential for groundwater resource, and we see that our estimated potential is around 619 million cubic meters. But of this, we realize that only 7.21 million has been safely extracted. And of course, we have the extraction rate going to almost 193 million cubic meters per year. It's also to note that a number of people in Kenya, or a good population within our country, they use groundwater resources, and actually the biggest of this percentage is within the rural. Just like I saw for Tanzania, I think we share a lot. So a good number of our rural communities, they use groundwater. Next slide, please. So this happens mainly, you find that these communal boreholes or pipes supplies from groundwater, and some depend on the hand dug well supplies from the rural population, where they have these hand pumps that people have within the communities, and similar ones also exist in the cities. But there are also other multiple uses that people have that use groundwater in our country, and we've seen this especially along the coastal lines. We have things like mining. There's a lot of irrigation that also happens using groundwater in our country, and other commercial and industrial uses that we have been using as a country. Next slide. There are challenges that do exist, just like I saw for the case of Uganda and Tanzania also. I would say that this resource has not been properly explored, and we realize that there's poor quality of some of the groundwater in our country. There's the problem of overexploitation, saline intrusion along the coastal areas, and one that I've seen is most common problem is inadequate knowledge on the occurrence of the resource, because not many people really realize that groundwater is a good resource that can be used, but only if it is properly developed. So for poor quality, you realize that there's some aquifers really recharge from the rivers, which is really a good source for groundwater. But some of these rivers, which is surface water, are also heavily polluted. There are many aquifers that have groundwater quality issues. For example, Nairobi, part of Nairobi, actually, like half of Nairobi, they depend on groundwater. But you realize that the aquifers have high fluoride concentration, which, as I saw in Shushmita's presentation, some of them exceed WHO standards, which is a challenge to our country. And there's some aquifers that are very saline, with the conductivity exceeding 8,000, such as Lotikipi aquifer. When you go to Mombasa Island and mostly the coastal area, you find that there is limestone and related aquifers. Of course, there's the saline intrusion from the sea, which is really a challenge. A study that was done down at the coast by an organization that we work closely with, UpGrow, they showed that ideally there are some boreholes that had been dug sometimes back down at the coast, in the coastal parts of the country. They were okay, but in recent years, you realize that there has been a lot of saline intrusion. Of course, this is related to climate change issues. A lot of fresh water melting and going into the ocean, into the sea, and then finding itself into the groundwater. So this is a really challenge. Next slide. And one other problem, like I said, the knowledge about groundwater is still very low in our country. And so also that follows about the use and the development. So there are two bodies, if I may say, that are charged to deal with groundwater in our country. And this is the National Environment Management Authority, what we call NEMA. And we have the other one called Water Resources Authority. We have a Water Act 2016, but it does not really speak around groundwater issues. So you find that when you talk about the enabling environment for groundwater has been a challenge, because really we don't have it in serious policy documents to promote use of groundwater, and let alone recharge using rainwater. Next slide. So groundwater recharge, what I realized as which may be artificial ground recharge using the rainfall, is very limited in our country. So mainly we talk about rivers, which is surface water, the rain, and just an overview would show that the infrastructure for harvesting rainwater is very, very limited in our country. And even more, data on artificial groundwater recharge is limited. Is to say that both the government and even the NGOs and people like World Bank and all other development partners that have been working with us, it is not so much that is spoken about, especially issues of recharge by rainwater. So I would say that what Uganda is doing, I think, is a very good thing. You know, putting in policies and the learning that has come due to the program that you're having with a Center for Science and Environment. I think for Kenya, this would be a good place for us to really learn from your experiences, because the infrastructure here is very limited. Next slide. So I think that would be all from me. It was just sharing what is happening in the country and to give a picture of what is here for us, as we realize it's not really much, but I think we need to learn a lot from Uganda and Tanzania and the other countries that are doing that. And especially Sunita, when I came to for my studies in Center for Science and Environment, I saw that you guys are doing really a good job. I think this would be a place for all of us and everybody listening to start learning from. I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Vincent. I think from what I have heard, we have 10 more minutes. So first, I have firstly, let me put it, everyone has appreciated the presentations very much. So thank you so much, all the speakers. I have an interesting question from Mohammed Mia from Bangladesh, looking at the whole issue of groundwater recharge, and then, of course, the overuse by industry and by housing complexes, and how do you bring in the rules and regulations to make sure that every part of society plays a role, both for recharge as well as for making sure that there is no pollution. So I think that's really the top agenda, Mr. Mia, and I think thank you so much for the question you've asked from Bangladesh. It's very clear that this really brings also the whole issue of large users of groundwater together, because as you improve the groundwater regime, you will have large users like industry, which will overuse the groundwater, and that will then lead to more problems. And we need, therefore, rules and bylaws to be brought in, both in the building design as well as in city planning, so that that does not happen. Now, given that and what we have heard, Shushmita, if I may call upon you, how now can we work better with Chris, with Khalid, and with other countries, including Kenya, on taking this agenda forward? I mean, from what I've heard from everyone, it is very clear that groundwater resources are critical in countries, but they are not focused enough. that we need strategies both to improve the recharge of groundwater, and exactly as Chris said, we need to make sure that we can do that through decentralized structures, through structures across the countries, which involves communities as well. And then, of course, as we heard from Khalid, it's also very important to make sure we bring the connection with sanitation, because it is also very clear that if you recharge groundwater and it gets contaminated, as you and Erisa brought out so clearly in your presentation, that you're also finding very high fecal coliform in the groundwater level. So if you do not improve the sanitation side and the pollution side of the story, then your groundwater will get recharged, but it will be unusable. So I think it's both part of the strategy. So how do we move now, and what can we do together in the coming months? That would be my agenda now.
So, ma'am, as we have seen that only talking about groundwater is not a complete story. We need to also focus very much on the fecal sludge management. So we need to strategize both the management of the fecal sludge, fixing the toilet technologies, and also connect it to the quality of the groundwater, which is used as the main source of drinking water. So to get a best quality of drinking water, we need to focus on the sanitation part also. So with Ministry of Water and Environment, who is looking after both water and sanitation in rural areas, we need to strategize ways to actually move forward with the sanitation strategies and policies, reuse policies of wastewater so that wastewater is treated before any disposal, and also can be reused so that it can supplement the water conservation. And also we need to actually, this will help to improve the groundwater also. So we need to have this package, complete package, and we should not see it in silos right now, and we should move forward with both management of fecal sludge and also focus on the groundwater quality.
But if I bring in Chris into this, Chris, how do you see the next steps on groundwater recharge? I mean, as you were pointing out in your opening remarks, you talked about, can we actually work together in certain parts of Uganda to see how we can do this on the ground? Because you so clearly identified right at the beginning saying, we can make the policies, we can make the regulations that you're asking, but we need to implement this on the ground, and we need to implement recharge strategies on the ground. So I think you put your finger right on top of the key point. So that's what I want to come back to you and say, how can we work with you further on this? It's a very exciting agenda. It's something that I think if we could do, we can actually start working then with other countries as well, sharing experiences from India and taking the work forward. So Chris.
Thank you, Sunita, and thanks panelists and participants on the webinar. There is also a question which was coming from Ashwani Kumar. Two questions, actually I was typing the same answers. Any attempt to estimate the groundwater use in towns and the regulatory framework. What we are doing now, with the CSE, we have analyzed and found out that the legal framework is okay.
Yes.
There could be some issues to tighten here and there, and we are in the process of reviewing the Water Act, which was enacted in 1995. But the issues are not that of a complicated matter. So what we are moving on to do now, each and every area in this country, Uganda, is under a catchment management zone. A catchment management zone, so that we know that any activities that you do on water supply in this area have got an effect on other users within the same catchment.
Yes.
We have identified that and we want to take that one further. And the regulatory framework, which was asked by Mr. Kumar, which I was typing on the response, was that the regulatory framework is that whoever uses groundwater, because we know that this is a finite resource and it needs renewal, if we don't increase on this elaborate method of recharging groundwater, then we are going to over-abstract, or we find that we are actually getting less and less of the groundwater that is available for use. So what we are moving in to do is that the regulatory framework limits the abstraction of groundwater, and then all those people who are in the same catchment are under the catchment management zone, so that we know that your abstraction affects the others.
Yes.
The legal framework is okay, as analyzed by CSE with us. We have provided all that, and they found that it is okay. And the research is not a bit of a problem. The country, and I hope in other countries in the region in Africa and in Asia, I think there is nothing that stops research where we want to see how we can improve on the catchments and by recharging using groundwater.
Yeah.
The main area now, what we are going to look at is how do we best do it? How do we best do it in view of the underlying natural geological formations? How are we going to do it? And to make sure that it is not the contaminated surface water that ends up in our fair good water in the ground. Those are the things that we are going to look at, and this is how we want to move forward. And we see how best we can really attract because we have so much of this rainwater. And if I give you the Ugandan case, the Ugandan scenario, all this rainwater has now flooded the part of the Sudan.
Yes.
But it is flooding.
Yes.
But in Uganda itself, where the water is coming from, we are really looking for water. We cannot get it. We are just now trying to salvage here and there to look for surface water, but the groundwater, which is naturally filtered, which could be recharged using the rainwater, we are not getting it. But how best can we develop this? Those are the issues that we want to look at. And those are the areas where we're excited with the CSE that help us get some of these ideas. Let's see how we can get this water into the ground, whether it's through check dams, whether through the groundwater recharge wells. And this is where we are doing using this collaboration that we are having with CSE. And in order to see how best we can provide clean water to the people we are serving, the people we are being responsible for, and using the technologies that are available to us.
Thank you, Chris. In fact, we have a very interesting, a very similar Shushmita from Swaziland. We have issues in the, including the same, Mr. Magagula has said, failure to regulate abstraction of groundwater, pollution by industrial effluents, and high fluoride levels, especially in the dry lowlands and areas of Swaziland. So I think if I may, we are now coming to the end of this, and let me put some proposals to all of you. Hearing everyone, and then I will leave it to Shushmita to individually speak to all of you and see how do we move ahead. I think what is coming out very clearly is that we need to focus on groundwater, both the recharge of groundwater as well as the quality of groundwater in different countries, both in the region of Asia as well as in Africa. And we need to learn from each other what are the best practices of doing so. So I think there is a clear agenda here that we need to work together. But what I would suggest, Chris, Khalid, and Shushmita, is that focus on two major areas for the future. One, focus on recharge. You know, one of the biggest problems with groundwater, Chris, has been when we over-regulate groundwater, it creates a lot of problems because we don't have the capacity to be able to license every well. We don't have the capacity to be able to check what is the level of abstraction from all wells. So we can look at, and we should bring together all of you to understand what are the emerging technologies for groundwater monitoring. But groundwater monitoring is a highly, it's a very labor intensive work, and it's something that requires a lot of ability and capacity within government institutions to do. And it's very difficult to monitor. I mean, at the end of the day, if I may tell you, in India, we have 19 million well owners. 19 million. Just consider that. Now, if you thought that government agencies could go and monitor what is the level of abstraction in the wells and monitor the regulate each well owner, it's not possible. So I think the more interesting and the more innovative strategies is how do you enable recharge in groundwater? Because that's the enabling part of the agenda. That's where you get people to understand the role of groundwater and the ability to be able to recharge it, because that then gives them water in their hands. Once they have water in their hands, then we come up with agendas on how to regulate it better. The question that we got asked from Bangladesh is a classic problem where if you do recharge groundwater and you do not punish or regulate the more larger users of groundwater, you will find it becomes unsustainable. But that's part 2 of the agenda. So the first part of the agenda, I would say, and I think this was very clearly said in the webinar, and I would now request for more detailed plans to come up so that I can also discuss it with Shushmita, and we can then come back to you on how we can work together, is to really talk about how to implement recharge of groundwater in different countries and work together with you, learn how to do this and what it will take on the ground. I'm not talking about it on paper, but on the ground. How do we do it? In different conditions, hard rock conditions, in other conditions, what are the strategies? What can be done? How can government facilitate it? So that becomes the first part of the agenda. The second part of the agenda is really linked to sanitation, to make sure that we can avoid pollution of the groundwater. Because what has come out very clearly in Tanzania, what has come out in Uganda, what has come out in Kenya, and I'm sure it's the same in Swaziland, and it's the same in India, same in that our users of groundwater are also very poor communities. So they need to have access to both sanitation and fecal sludge management so that the groundwater does not get contaminated. And then we also need strategies not to allow groundwater to be contaminated by industrial effluents. So that's the second part of it. So my first part of the strategy, if it's something that we can work together, and I will now leave Shushmita to come back to all of you to sit together, discuss this, and come up with some how to take this forward, would be how do we actually work with you to get communities to recharge groundwater on the ground? What are the strategies and policies for that? Because rainwater harvesting is such a powerful idea. It allows you to harvest the rain. I mean, Chris, you've said it so clearly. Today we have a scenario of floods when we have rain, and then we have drought. We need to make sure we can optimize on our flood waters. So what will it take to do that? So that we can capture every drop of rain and we can recharge it. And I think that's the strategy I would really urge you, that if we can come up with that, and then of course the fecal sludge management as the first part of it. And then we can work together to talk about industrial pollution. We can talk about large users of groundwater and what can they do. So Erisa, Shushmita, if I can now ask that if you can come back after some discussions, and then I look forward to hearing from all of you what are the next steps. But I would like to thank all of you and thank particularly the ministry in Uganda, Chris, and your leadership there for the effort that you have made and for your trust in us. And we will certainly work with you. And we look forward to this collaboration very much because we think here is an opportunity for us to look at what we can do on the ground, create models of experience, and use that to actually share with other countries and also share experiences of other countries so that we can all benefit together. So Shushmita will definitely work with you on this, and I look forward to our collaboration on this. So thank you so much for doing this webinar, and thank you every one of you for your presentations. Fascinating and clearly a clear agenda for us to work together. Thank you very much. Thank you.